Oh, hello. We're going to investigate some fractions. And fractions are a number form that are very useful when we're working with data and statistics. We can usually need to develop fractions or percentages to show proportions and ratios. So let's do some fraction work to help us build those skills. Let's try this investigation. It says for a given fraction, when you subtract 1, the number 1, from the numerator and the denominator, this is going to form for us a new fraction. Now, is this new fraction formed greater than or less than the previous fraction? And does it depend on the type of starting fraction you began with? So let's look at an example. Here's a fraction, 8/9. The top number is referred to as the numerator, the bottom number is the denominator. So let's follow the rules of subtracting 1 from the top number and the bottom number, and let's form a new fraction. So if I subtract 1, then I'm going to have a 7/8 as my new fraction. Yeah? Now, I have to ask myself the question, is 7/8 as a fraction greater than or less than 8/9? How do I compare those two fractions? How do I compare one fraction, the size of one fraction, to the size of another fraction? Well, best way to do it is by ensuring they have the same sized denominator. Okay, the same amount that a whole object has been shared into parts. Alright, so then we can compare how many amount of that same sized part we have. So let's form common denominators. So a 9th and an 8th. Well, what's common between those two numbers? We can use multiplication to help us find that. Such as, I want to look for a multiple of 9 and 8. Multiple of 9 and 8. And I can go 9 times 8. Well, 9/8, if I remember my times tables, 9/8 is 72. So both 9 goes into 72 and 8 goes into 72 equally. Yeah, absolutely. So from that, can we now form equivalent fractions of 8/9 and 7/8? So what would 8/9 be with a denominator of 72? Well, a ninth is now 8 times bigger to become a 70 with a denominator of 72. So my numerator should also be 8 times bigger. And if I did 8 times 8, I'll get my equivalent numerator of 64. Okay. Now, what about 7/8? Well, I multiplied my 8 by 9 to get a 72. So to form my equivalent numerator for 7/8, I also got to multiply the numerator, by 9. So that gives me 72 denominator, and 9/7 is 63. Now I can examine those two fractions and ask myself, well, which one is bigger? The original fraction or our new fraction? And we can see that 64/72 as a fraction, there's more of them, and that's a bigger fraction than 63/72. Yeah? So this, and to show that the first fraction is larger, I can put a greater than sign. Yeah, everybody understand? So, what happens if I repeat the process? Well, if I subtract 1 from the numerator and the denominator of this new fraction I form, then I'm going to get 6/7. Yeah. And what would be an equivalent numerator now? Well, between 8 and 7/8 and 6/7, if I'm comparing those two, then I form a common multiple of the 8 and the 7 between those two numbers. 7 times 8. Okay, well, 7 times 8 is how much? 56. So if I'm comparing my 7/8 and my 6/7, then I want two fractions, both with a denominator of 56. Yeah? So my 7/8, well, I had to multiply by a 7 by the 8 to get a denominator of 56. So that means my numerator of 7, I also got to multiply by a 7 to find the equivalent. And 7 sevens is 49. So 49/56 is the same as 7/8. Okay, so what about my 6/7? Well, I multiplied that by an 8 to get to a 56. So to make sure I get an equivalent numerator, I also got to multiply this one by an 8. And my 6/8 gives me a 48. And now I can see, well, which one is greater? And I can clearly see 49 out of 56 is a larger fraction than 48 out of 56. So that is also greater. All right, so let's sum up what we've noticed so far. Started with 8/9. We figured out that 8/9 as a fraction is greater than the new fraction we made, 7/8. By just subtracting one from the numerator and one from the denominator, we have that new fraction. So then the next new fraction we formed was by following our process, subtract one from the numerator and one from the denominator, we had 6/7. And we also could demonstrate that 49 out of 56 is greater than 48 out of 56. So our 7/8 is greater than 6/7. So would that always occur? Would the next fraction, 5/6, be smaller and the previous one greater? And then would 5/6 be greater than a new fraction we formed, 4/5? This is something that I'm going to pose to you guys to go further now to investigate. Are they always, the new fractions we form, are they always less than the previous one that we had? And does it depend on the starting fraction? What happens if we choose a different starting fraction? Instead of 8/9, what happens if we choose something different? Instead of 1 less than 9, what happens if we had 5/11, for instance? Would that change things? Interesting, huh? So I'd like to see your investigation on that.